Greetings and welcome once again to another episode of Critical Mistakes in World of Tanks. I'm your host, Wrath, and today we're going to be looking at light tanks. While this video does provide a general overview of how to improve your light tank performance, I strongly recommend that you visit Tazilon.net, which is a much more comprehensive guide to light tanks created by arguably the greatest light tank driver on the North American servers. So when you get a chance, please, I'm going to put the link to his website and YouTube channel in the description. Please go visit those and read the information and watch his videos because it will help you immensely. Now, light tanks are quite possibly one of the most demanding and skill-intensive tanks that you can choose to play. This is especially true as you reach tiers 4 and 5, with the appearance of a large number of heavy tanks. This forces the light tanks into a more specialized role. Often people mistaken the role of scouting to be running out ahead of their team and lighting up the enemy tanks and hoping their speed and maneuverability will see them through. However, this rarely works out, as the act of speeding too far ahead of your own team often gets you killed before your team can make effective use of your spotting. Efficient scouts combine planning, cunning, observation, patience, and most importantly, adaptability to allow them to grant maximum advantage to their team. More than any other class of tanks, the light tank needs to focus on taking actions which benefit their team the most. This can be anything from choosing to stay back and hidden with a large view range to expose enemy tanks in the open so that your own team can fire at them without fear of reprisal. Or it could be making a sacrifice play to draw attention away from an undermanned line on your side so that your team can deal with those overwhelming odds by effectively you taking several of their tanks out of the conflict as they turn to try and deal with you as you're running around their flank. As a light tank, your goal should always be to provide overwhelming tactical advantage to your team, not seeking personal glory or kills. Often light tanks must choose to not fire at enemies rather than taking the shot whenever it becomes available. This is because firing almost always reveals your position and removes your concealment. Other times, a scout might have to seek out and engage enemy scouts to neutralize the advantage from the enemy team. Likewise, an efficient scout must learn to exploit the changing conditions of the battlefield as the battle unfolds. This can be slipping behind enemy lines to hunt down their artillery, moving to flank engaged enemy tanks, and even exposing yourself, as I said before, to enemy attention so that their focus switches away from your teammates, tank destroyers and heavy tanks, so that they can have an easier time of clearing a lane in the battlefield. It's very, very important that you pay attention to what is going on the battlefield. That means you have to look at what the enemies are doing. You have to pay attention to where your team is having trouble, and you have to try and take that pressure off, or at least give them an intelligence boon in the form of knowing where they're being flanked, giving them as much room as possible to maneuver. Anything that will support your team should be your primary goal. Some of the things that Tazilon talks about in his videos is things like, if you see on the map that one of your sides has fallen and the enemy is pushing through towards your cap, you're a light tank. You're the fastest tanks on the field comparatively to the heavies and the mediums, tank destroyers and artillery. So you're the most suited, even if you're on the far side of the battlefield, you're the most suited to get back to the cap and defend it. And that doesn't mean trying to hold out in there and slug it out with heavies and mediums or tank destroyers. Your goal is to delay, to prevent the enemy from getting the advantage that they're looking for. This means that you're going back and popping out to take a shot at enemy vehicles to reset the cap. So you have to be mindful of which tanks have been hit and which ones haven't once they're in cap, so that you can maximize how you're eliminating their cap points by taking shots at the appropriate tanks. This means that if you've got one side of your map getting jammed up, because you'll see that a lot in battles where you'll have a large column of your team, maybe say 40, almost 50% of your team will go one direction to try and overwhelm it. But sometimes those actions don't work out. The enemy's able to pin them down with a small number of tanks in a narrow gap and prevent them from exploiting their numbers. This is where you come in as a light scout. You can go and maneuver around that tight enemy position, get behind them, turn some of their guns away from your team, let your team try to break through and get to the enemy. Or you might have to turn your attention to the other flank where your team is lighter and the enemy has a numerical advantage on that side, and you'll have to try to either get them good spotting, get spotting for your artillery if you have any, or possibly tank destroyers that are in the back, so that they can fire and take out enemy vehicles and reduce their numbers. The other thing you have to be very, very conscious of is what's the enemy scouts doing? Are they still in play? Because while you're trying to do this, they're trying to do the same thing. And you're the best equipped, especially if you're facing other small, fast tanks, you're the best equipped to hunt down those enemy scouts and neutralize them. This could be anything from getting them spotted while they're in the open so that your team can effectively take them out, or literally getting into a chasing battle with them in some of the larger areas of the maps to force them into a retreat. Anything that helps your team is your primary goal, because you're not going to contribute a huge amount of damage. Your damage is going to come from allowing your team to effectively take out enemy tanks. That's why spotting is so important, and one of the biggest things that a lot of people forget to do is learn the differences of your light tank. Not all light tanks are created equally, and it's absolutely critical that you learn the strengths of your tank and its weaknesses. This can be from the light tanks that are designed specifically to be more camouflage efficient, or light tanks that are built to get up to their top speed quickly, making them more agile and maneuverable on the battlefield. Tanks that have a larger effective view range. Whatever the strength of your tank is, you want to exploit that and focus at least a little bit on that aspect of your vehicle. Never get too far ahead of your own team, but you want to be a little bit out ahead of them because you want to maximize your spotting. Use your cover and concealment to the best of your ability, because a lot of times you can make it so that the guy on the enemy team, he's poking around in the woods trying to find your guys, and your guys can see him and he never knows what hits him. He just explodes when 3 or 4 of your tanks blast shots into him simultaneously. This is, I'm sure you've experienced that when an effective scout is on the enemy team. You're driving around in a medium or a heavy tank, and all of a sudden you just get hit out of nowhere, and you're like, what just hit me? And it's 5 or 6 enemy tanks or an artillery unit that's coordinating with the scout to use him to best advantage. any of this can be a game changer. And I'm going to be doing videos on the other types of tanks. So, we'll go and look at how the Scout plays into the role of the tank destroyer, how the Scout supports the artillery, how the Scout supports the heavies and the mediums. Because some of the aspects of what you do bleed over into medium tanks, but they have a different focus. Their role is focused on delivering combat flanking rather than spotting enemies specifically. But you really do need to be willing to take a few risks, and most importantly, be willing to sit and wait and watch and see what's going on, and be willing to change your plans at the drop of a hat when you see that things are not going as expected. Now, I've run a couple of matches here that you're seeing playing as we're going through, where I'm playing my light tanks, which in this case I've got a Tier 5 Crusader and a Tier 5 Chaffee and a couple of Tier 3 light tanks. And you can see that in those, I'm not specifically looking to engage enemy vehicles directly. I want to reveal them to my team. And there's actually, in one of the videos, if you watch, the side that I'm on, we only have, I think it's like 2 or 3 tanks, and the enemy has deployed 5, including a KV-2 and a SU-100Y. So some massive firepower that our team has to deal with. And I expose myself and run literally right past the KV-2 and have his attention drawn away from that fight. And several of the other tanks draw their attention away. And after I'm killed, you can see that those 2 tanks that I drew the pressure off of were able to punch through the enemy vehicles because only a couple of them were paying attention to the threat directly in front of them. The rest of them were turning their guns away from the fight, trying to get what looked like an easy kill, which was me. One of your best assets as a light tank is your terrain. Know the terrain that you're fighting in. If this means you have to do some training matches on various maps to learn where the best places to set up an ambush, to hide, to get maximum effect of your view range, knowing those things is critical to being more effective. And like I said, it's all about your command of the battlefield, because the light tank always has to have an eye on the mini-map, has to have an eye on his allies, and has to see where he can be the most use. You're never gonna be like a tank destroyer sitting in the back just popping shots. You're never gonna be the medium tank that's flanking and engaging tanks from the side in part of a major formation. You're always gonna be sort of that quasi-lone wolf, or that advanced unit that is ahead of or out away from the main units, exposing the vulnerabilities of the enemy team. Because what you can't see can kill you in World of Tanks, and you're the eyes. You're the one that brings all of these guys into the light so that they can't kill freely. They have to worry about shots coming from nowhere that they can see and taking them out. So I hope that this has gotten you sort of primed for the right kind of mindset that you need to have as a light tank. Whether you're choosing to do a fast mobile light tank, or you're choosing to play some of the more reserved spotting light tanks. Once you know what your tank is good at, like a good example is the Chaffee is really good at spotting. It's got one of the largest view ranges for a Tier 5 tank. And augmenting that with like binoculars and a camo net can help you maximize the effectiveness of that to the point that you can get maximum view range. I think with my Chaffee, I think I have like pretty much at minimum like a third or half of the battlefield, that if I'm in the right spot I can see most everything that's going on, and that gives me a very good idea of what is going on the battlefield. So I can see the holes in the enemy line, I can see where they're vulnerable, and I can see where to either attack or just run interference. And I mean, don't be afraid to lose your light tank. I mean, sometimes the best play is the suicidal play, and that's not the suicide scouting of running out there and just trying to light everybody up real quick. Yes, you want to get out there and try and get a spot on the enemy tanks early in the match so that your team can see how they're deploying. But you don't want to take your tank out of the fight early, because the value of a light tank goes up exponentially the longer it's in the fight, because as the tanks start getting whittled down, the gaps in their lines get bigger. So a fast-moving tank can exploit those much easier. The longer you're in the fight, the less information each team has, because they've lost more and more vehicles that are spotting and giving information to what's going on. And so you get this sort of narrowing of information. Tanks start your drivers for heavies and stuff start focusing on the nearest immediate threat. They start focusing on what little information they can see. And so to have a scout lasting midway or late into a game gives you an intelligence advantage. You've got somebody out there who can spot what they're doing, spot how they're repositioning, spot where their ambushes are before they run into them. All of that can be a massive advantage, and it's absolutely critical. You can also do things like diversionary capping, where you see a gap in the enemy's lines and you slip through either unnoticed or largely unchallenged and get back to their cap, and suddenly all they know is that somebody's on their cap. And so you'll often see that getting a vehicle onto cap earlier than expected can absolutely throw a panic into an enemy team, because suddenly half their guys will say, oh, I've got to go back and deal with that. And so you'll get a lot of their mediums and a lot of their faster heavy tanks turning around to try and come back and engage you, to try and push you off of their cap. And that is absolutely useful, because you're taking firepower off of their main line. You're forcing them to turn their backs on your teammates, who are absolutely going to exploit any opportunity that they can get to get a kill. And if you're spotting those tanks, you're getting as much credit for the damage that they're dealing as any damage that you might deal yourself. So definitely, after watching this video, go and read through the information on Tazilon.net, because it is absolutely a game changer for how you look at light tanks. And until next time, I'm Wrath, and I'll catch you on the flip side.